to try to speak up as fast as possible. However, in order to save time, what we're going to do is the panelists is going to go through with their presentation, all 4 of them. And then afterward, then we will take questions. And maybe that way, first of all, your questions may be for a couple of panelists, not just for one. And secondly, we probably can save a little time. I hope so. Okay. Now, this is the 3rd panel. And this is the panel that probably is most diverse as far as where they come from. We have Dr. Wu from Taiwan, where Dr. Wing from China, from Shanghai, from Nanking, and Dr. Poon from Singapore, and Dr. Benny from Hong Kong. So, and they're going to all speak on this topic that you have on your agenda, which is on religion and society, a comparison of various models currently being practiced in the Chinese-speaking world. And I want to emphasize it's in the Chinese-speaking world. So that's where they come from, mainly from the Chinese-speaking world. So just like before, you have their bio, you have their CVs. So I'm not going to go through and read about, where they got their degrees and what accomplishment they have. Okay, you can read about that. But be sure you know that they are all very, very respectful and very well known in whatever they are doing, And so without further delay, I would like to call Dr. Benny Tai from Hong Kong to give us our first presentation.
Thank you, Caleb. Thank you, the organizer, for inviting me to come to this symposium. And the organizers actually asked me to kind of answer the question, that is whether the Hong Kong model is adaptable to China. Actually, I can end this presentation by just a very few words. No, it's not adaptable. But since they have paid my flight and all my accommodation, I think I need at least to have to talk about at least 15 minutes in order to pay for the course. So my presentation actually is divided into 3 parts. The first part will be on the legal and constitutional order established in Hong Kong. And as you may know, that Hong Kong is a part of China. I will just briefly mention about the key features of the legal and constitutional order of Hong Kong. Then I'll illustrate what I would say the 4 main features of the model of law and religion in Hong Kong. Then the third part will be answering the questions and why it is not adaptable to China, at least in the near future. I think that will be my argument. The first part, Hong Kong's legal and constitutional order under one country, 2 systems, and different presenters have their own style, and I'm a lawyer, so you will see a lot of legal text here in my presentation. So I refer to the Constitution of the People's Republic of China. That is the whole constitutional basis of the one country, 2 systems, that Hong Kong will be practicing a different system from mainland China because the National People's Congress can set up a special administrative region. And this is the Joint Declaration, the main text of the Joint Declaration. There's an agreement between the British government and the Chinese government. Hong Kong was a British colony, and later you'll see that how this historical link with the United Kingdom, especially the English common law, how that affect the law and religion in Hong Kong. And China resumed the exercise the sovereignty over Hong Kong in 1997. And the basic law, that is our Constitution, Article 2 provides that the NPC authorizes the Hong Kong SAR to exercise a high degree of autonomy, and meaning that we can have our own executive and legislative and especially independent judicial power, including the power of final adjudication. And for the laws that will be practiced in Hong Kong, Article 8 provides that the laws previously enforced in Hong Kong, including the common law, the English common law, will continue to be applicable subject to amendments. And Article 11 made clear that the Hong Kong systems could be different from the mainland systems. I think this laid the kind of the base for us to understand why the Hong Kong system is different from the mainland system. I think this morning, the two sessions, we have looked at how the mainland systems. So I will briefly mention about the four main features of the model of law and religion in Hong Kong. Firstly, that freedom of religion is legally and constitutionally protected. And the understanding of freedom of religion, as I will illustrate, the Article 39 of the Basic Law, that's our Constitution, provides that the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR, will be applicable in Hong Kong. So the constitutional standard that will be used to determine what is the meaning of freedom of religion actually is ICCPR. So we refer to the Article 18 of the ICCPR. And I think the paragraph 1 answered the questions that whether religious freedom of religion include only the right to believe or also the manifestation of that the freedom of the beliefs. And Article 18, paragraph 1, everyone should have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, and all these things. Now, compare with the concept of freedom of religion now practicing in mainland China. I kind of summarized to a few main points. Firstly, that the concept of religion is given a very wide understanding. So actually in a court case, Falun Gong is recognized as a religion. So even though that the people may disagree that whether Falun Gong is a religion, but at least that's the Hong Kong courts recognizing that Falun Gong is a religion and have the same right as other religious bodies to exercise or practice their freedom of religion. And secondly, that you look at the description of the rights under Article 18 of the ICCPR is much more detailed as if you compare it with Article 36 of the PRC Constitution. And I think one very important thing about the Bills of Rights in Hong Kong is that not only the rights is being recognized, but also the limitations or legitimate restrictions that could be imposed upon the right is clearly defined under the Article 18 and also following international jurisprudence. The Hong Kong courts basically follow the international jurisprudence. The decisions of the European Court of Human Rights have been applied it and used it to interpret also the Article 18, and surely the comments by the Human Rights Committee under the ICCPR, they are all being used to help the court to interpret the meaning of Article 18. But I think another thing that is maybe the fundamental difference between the Hong Kong system and the mainland system is that the right is justiciable. That means that it is, you can, anyone find that his or her right of freedom of religion is being infringed, they can put it to the court. As I've mentioned that the Falun Gong, they have involved in court cases raising not directly the freedom of religion, but actually is related like freedom of their freedom of expression. They have also used the other rights provided by the ICCPR. So that's the first part, is about the freedom of religion basically is maintained or protected in Hong Kong. Maybe here I actually, if you look at Article 18, it includes the individual's right to freedom of religion, but actually it also includes the organizations, the religious organizations, to have also the right to freedom of religion. But I will make a distinction, or make it just not to say that I will say that Article 18 only protect individual rights, but not the collective, the religious organizations. But I just for presentation purpose, I have more features to illustrate, so I'll talk about the religious organizations later. The second part, I think is quite interesting, is to look at some laws in Hong Kong actually reflect the values of a particular religion. Actually, it's the Christian values. I'll give you an example. If you look at the Marriage Ordinance, Section 40, you'll see that the definition of marriage is a Christian marriage. though the Christians actually is only a very small part of the population, I think that's the historical influence of the English laws, how the English laws affect the laws of Hong Kong. And Hong Kong also practiced the common law. I just referred a court case. For those who have studied the English common law, you must know this case, Donald versus Stevenson. That is a court case on law of tort, on negligence. And Lord Atkin in the judgment referred to the neighborhood principle. That is referred in the Bible. Actually, you can see the influence of Christianity. You can see that it's very explicit in the way. See in Section 40 in the marriage ordinance. But it could be also in a very subtle way that the religion inspired the judge and to decide or determine a certain legal principles. And that legal principle as part of the common law is still now practicing in Hong Kong. So every law student will have to learn about this Donald and Stevenson, and through that they will learn about the neighborhood principle and the passages that the judge have referred to in the judgment. Then the third feature is about the church and state relationship. Basically, the church and state is separate. But that's actually, if you look through the Constitution of Hong Kong, we do not find any specific provision that is on like the First Amendment in the U.S. Constitution. There's no such a clause there. So what you can say that is that there's no state religion in Hong Kong. Basically, all religions are equally protected. There's a separation, but there's no strict separation. I think in the U.S. that they have about the First Amendment, the No Establishment Clause have been interpreted differently by the Supreme Court at different stages. And one feature that can tell us that there's no such strict separation in Hong Kong is that the many schools in Hong Kong, they are run by churches. And these schools, they actually receive subsidies from the government. I think that's unthinkable in U.S. that for the religious organizations to run schools and using government subsidies. That's the principle of U.S. But in Hong Kong, we do not have that kind of strict separation. So it's separation, but the degree is not that big. And so I would say, no strict separation of church and state. And the fourth feature about the law and religion model is the autonomy of religious organizations. They are respected. How we can see that the autonomy of religious organizations are respected? Firstly, there's no additional registration requirements, unlike in mainland China. So, surely you need to be registered as a legal entity, in the form of a company or in the form of a society under the society's ordinance or the company's ordinance. But there's no additional requirement to be a religious body. So there's no such additional registration requirements. And to establish a place of worship also surely is quite legitimate for the state to impose some kind of regulation, like on planning, on fire safety, all these things, that will be applicable to all public places of public gathering. So again, there's no such additional requirements for establishing a place of worship. And there's no state control over qualifications of religious personnel. That's all determined by the religious bodies themselves. And I think that's also a major difference with mainland China, is that there's a right to maintain and develop relationship with religious organizations in foreign countries. And so that's actually in the constitution of PRC, actually is prohibiting religious organizations in China to have connections with foreign bodies. But this is recognized and in the constitution. So now we can see that the models of the law and religion in Hong Kong with the four features. So the answer to this question is about whether it's adaptable. Now I think we can see from the historical path that Hong Kong has walked through, that how come we can get up to the point we have now, the four features of our law and religion model. It has its own history. I think that kind of history cannot be repeated in mainland China. And also, yes, we are part of China, but because it's a one country, two systems, we have a different legal and constitutional order. As I mentioned, the court has an independent power to review legislation and also review administrative acts, especially reviewing legislation. That's a very important power. And the independence of the judiciary, I think, is also a very important feature that distinguishes the Hong Kong model from the Chinese model. So we have a very different legal constitutional order and a different culture. I think maybe I can get more information from Brian about the attitudes of Chinese people towards religion. But I think also there's a different culture, how they see the different cultures. I think there's no such idea of Yangjiao, foreign religion. The Christianity will not be considered a foreign religion in Hong Kong. But I think, maybe that's lesser that kind of impression now in China. But I think there's still an issue that is it a foreign religion? So I think that's a different culture. So my conclusion would be that unless fundamental changes in the legal, constitutional, and political systems in China, and unless fundamental change in China's culture, that the Hong Kong model will not be adaptable to China. And that's actually a question that I would like to ask Professor Liu Pang, that he mentioned that the religion matters in China cannot be separate from the other development of China, especially constitutionalism. So actually, my point is that until China has constitutionalism, it's impossible, or at least it's not plausible, for China to adopt the Hong Kong model of law and religion. Thank you.
Dr. Poon?
Thank you. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me all the way from Singapore here to come to this distinguished gathering. I shall speak on religion and the development of a harmonious society in Singapore. And yes, I'm speaking only about Singapore, and I will not draw any inference about whether it's applicable to China at all. But Singapore's identity and continuing well-being depends on it being a harmonious society. Singapore's independence from Malaysia in 1965 was punctuated by 3 Malay-Chinese riots in 1950, 64, and 69. And these traumatic events shaped Singapore's sense of looming crisis and so provide a rationale for unity among all Singaporeans. Singapore is an island nation. About 2/3 the land area of Hong Kong has no hinterland, so everything is imported, religions included. So Singapore's talents included. Singapore's success lies in its geography and economy. It is a bridge between continents, it's a free port, a secure and stable haven for the whole region. So peoples from different ethnic groups, religious backgrounds can mingle and thrive in Singapore on the strength of their own merits. So multiculturalism and multilingualism, multi-ethnicity, and multi-religiosity are all part of Singapore's fabric. So for Singapore, what matters is not whether any religion can prove its worth. That's not the question. The right question is how can religion be harnessed to raise moral standards, social conscience, and responsible citizenship? That is a key question. That is how religion, how government, for example, and how the whole community can make use of its huge asset in religions for the common good. That is a key question for the government especially. So it is to Singapore's credit that the nation has not had a riot since the end of the 1960s. And this success story stands in huge contrast to the racial and religious violence that have marked neighboring countries, equally multi-religious and multi-ethnic nations, for example, in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Sri Lanka. So Singapore offers an interesting model for religion-state relations. Now, the 2010 Singapore census provides a convenient starting point for this study. According to this census, slightly over 5 million people live in Singapore, of which 3.2 million are Singaporeans, 500,000 of permanent residents, and 1.3 million of non-residents. And 74% of the residents are ethnic Chinese. And of those aged 15 and over, of those residents, about 18% profess Christianity, 44% Buddhist and Taoist, 15% are Muslim, and 5% Hindu faith, and 17% see themselves with no religion. So Malays account for about nearly 99% of the Muslims, the Buddhists, the Taoists, many come from Chinese. And Christianity attracts 20% of the Chinese, 13% of the Indians, and 58% who are classified as others, they profess Christianity. And among the permanent residents, over 23% are Christians. Christians also make up of 32% of Singaporeans university graduates, and this compared with 4.3% among the Muslims. So clearly, Singapore is a largely an ethnic Chinese society, and Singaporean Christians to make up a significant number of its intellectual capital, of which the nation depends to keep its economic edge in the region. And interestingly, the Christian population comes mainly from the Chinese, 83%. And a higher proportion of the permanent residents, 23%, compared to the national average of 18%, profess Christianity. So, in other words, Christianity has a significant presence among the more recent settlers and those who cannot be readily fit into the Chinese, Malay, Indian categories. And so Christianity enjoys a broader appeal across traditional demarcated lines. And I think that is important. So the Chinese Christian population, with the higher formal academic achievements, play a key role in Singapore's continuing success, perhaps in the future as well. Now, Singapore's demography underscores a sense of crisis Singaporeans face. The island state is surrounded by nations with huge Malay, Muslim, and sometimes anti-Chinese communities. Many commentators have noted the Singapore government's distrust of the Malay population, and even in 2001, Lee Kuan Yew, the founder of Singapore, insisted in a speech that we must never put the person in a situation where he may face a conflict of loyalties. And I said in answer to a question some nearly two years ago that it is a difficult matter to put a Malay Muslim of deeply religious family background in charge of a machine gun. So to the government, in contrast with the Malays, the Chinese Christians are key to nation building. Now, Lee Kuan Yew said in 1967, hardly publicized, but that's what he said, every society needs leadership. How do we create it in this area without tradition, without a past to fall back on in Singapore? But somewhere in the church hierarchy, some people are demonstrating more than above average activity, intelligence, worth, drive, ambition, civic consciousness. And in their own way, Christianity has brought together diverse peoples, diverse cultural, ethnic, linguistic, and social backgrounds. And a commentator noted a strong Christian presence in the business community and military establishment in Singapore in the 1970s. And he said, it would be good if a Singapore citizen could translate both religious heritage, the Puritan ethic, and the Roman Catholic instinct for stability and authority in a troubled world into business capacity, political acumen, and a readiness to defend the nation from malevolent neighbors. Those are strong words. Therefore, the Chinese Christian population is a chief asset to nation building, especially in the early years of nationhood. Now, at the same time, the government can capitalize on this asset only if it is able to allay the fears among its wider constituencies in Singapore and the region that ethnic Chinese and Christians do not receive preferential treatment in Singapore. So Singapore must never become an overseas Chinese community and a Christian nation. Neither should accord any religion a favored status, and any display of Chinese or Christian chauvinism would easily lead to social and political collapse. So Singapore needs to follow an intentional and disciplined policy in building up a harmonious and secular society. And Singapore's survival and economic success, therefore, depends on social stability. The National Pledge underscores this to all Singaporeans. I quote, "We, the citizens of Singapore, pledge ourselves to be one united people, regardless of race, language, and religion, so as to achieve happiness, prosperity, and progress for our nation." And the government plays a proactive and directive role to safeguard the interests of religious communities and to ensure religious harmony. And that is enshrined in the Constitution. I won't go into that. The legislative provisions are in place also to regulate religious activities and to preempt public disorder. And the penal code sanctions against offenses relating to religion or race. There's a Sedition Act proscribes against seditious tendencies. And the government can also resort to the Internal Security Act to deal with perceived threats to public order. And so it did on several occasions. The Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act came into effect in 1990, and this act enables the Minister for Home Affairs to issue a restraining order against any leader, official, or member of any religious group or institution who causes or attempts to cause ill feelings between the different religious groups, or who commits or attempts to commit subversive activities against the state under the guise of propagating or practicing a religious belief. And back in 1980, and to promote religious harmony, the Housing Development Board set up a quota for all in public housing to ensure that no particular racial group concentrated together to prevent sectarianism, and that is quite different to the U.S. situation. And the group representation constituency was introduced in 1988 to protect minority representation in Parliament. At least one of the MPs in a GRC must be a member of the Malay, Indian, or other minority community of Singapore. From the 1980s, Singapore increasingly saw the need to deal with the impacts of globalization on social harmony. So clearly, Singapore cannot isolate itself from outside currents. It depends on globalization for its continuing economic success. At the same time, globalization makes boundaries and borders porous and introduces rival carriers of the same religion. And indeed, to preserve the nation's identity in a globalizing age, in 1991, the Parliament adopted a set of what is called the shared values of a nation. But I want to underline that what is most important, the Singapore government does not only resort to legislation or appeal to the Constitution to promote religious harmony and to deal with religious conflict. It increasingly recognizes the role of local religious communities and the leaders to deal with religious problems. And the government also recognizes the need to earn the trust of the religious leaders. The Singapore ambassador underscored this point in a recent address to the United Nations. He said, "Governments can and should initiate processes at local levels to bring together key partners capable of establishing links between religious leaders. To do this sensitively and meaningfully, we need to recognize the local realities of society, such as the trust that people have in their governments to be impartial in their dealings with different ethnic communities. And indeed, following the 9/11 attacks, the leaders of the religious communities play an increasing public role to regulate the conduct of the constituencies and to keep religious peace with one another. And I end with this. Singapore is a secular nation state, and religion is strictly kept out of politics. Yet wisely, the nation has not enshrined the secular concept in its constitution. Far from marginalizing religion from the public realm, the government encourages religious groups to become publicly visible. And indeed, the public face of established religious communities is evident and is regarded as part of associational life. And the strength and cooperation between communal leaders at all levels makes Singapore more able to withstand sudden onslaughts of radical and divisive religious movements in a globalizing age. And that is what religion can contribute to nation building. And it's a folly to disregard that in governing nations today. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Dr. Wayne.
首先，我非常感谢基辛格学会和亚洲基金会对我的邀请。那么我呢，作为一个牧师和基督教的神学教授，所以我感觉到有必要强调，就是我肯定是坚持基督教信仰系统中所包含的真理的普世性和大公性。此外呢，效法耶稣，在世俗的生活中做见证，也是每一个基督徒要承担的责任。具体的说，就是先知、君王、祭司3种之分。所以本着这个基本立场，我来进入我对目前中国基督教的面临一些问题的思考。那么中国基督教面临一些什么问题呢？在国际的研究界，无论是从学术还是从信仰，实际上也就不外乎我们基督教的家庭教会，天主教的没有得到承认的地下的神父啊、主教啊等等，还有很多家庭教会。像比较注目的就是北京的守望教会，还有我们很多在中国各地的地方教会也没有得到承认和法律的保护。所以面对着这些问题，会议呢叫我提出一个思考，从神学的角度，从基督教神学的角度给予回答。我思考了好几个月，最后我想呢，就是我这个题目，就是关于教会组织的自治，恐怕是未来中国教会、中国社会能够寻找到一个最有效的办法，就是寻求到宗教组织，特别是基督教组织的自治，这是一个唯一的保障。那么怎么样来实现这个自治？我们需要理清历史的2条线索。从公元313年开始，基督教与国家的关系就演化成一直到今天的2条主线。一条主线呢是magisterial church， 另外一条主线呢是independent church， 或者叫 free church。那么这2条主线呢，特别是经过宗教改革，马丁路德的宗教改革，特别是奥格斯堡和平协定之后，它的范式发生了转变。在欧洲的magisterial church 作为 mainstream church， 到了美国倒过来了，就是欧洲的 magisterial mainstream church 到了美国不再变成了一个 mainstream church。而在欧洲受到迫害的free church， 到了美国却变成了一个 mainstream church。然后中国基督教的来源是来自美国的 mainstream church， 但是在欧洲呢是属于 free church。所以我想把这个范式弄清楚，我们就能够理解中国教会现在我们承传什么样的传统，面临什么样的问题，为什么对家庭教会、对守望教会、对地方教会等等，我们作为大教会，我们怎么样对待他们？而我们是不是已经实现了符合教会传统的界定？那么我就简单的把magisterial church 的发展，简单的过一下子。从公元313年君士坦丁皇帝开始从特别是公元320年的尼西亚公会议开始，一直到马丁路德的宗教改革，大概有4点里程碑式的界定，决定了在宗教改革之前，在基督教的欧洲 mainstream church， 也就是 magisterial church， 走的是国家教会的路，国家教会的路，政府保护的路。第一个就是313年君士坦丁协定，这个 religio licita， 拉丁文 religio licita， 就是走的是这个政府保护的教会，就是政教合一，实际上是政教合一。那么到了这个宗教改革以后，就相当于这个 Church of England 对于英格兰， Presbyterian Church 对于苏格兰， Catholic 对于这个法国、比利时、意大利、西班牙，东正教对于希腊、保加利亚、匈牙利、俄罗斯等等，它都享受着这个国家的保护，也就是 magisterial church。那么第三个重大的事情是1215年两个重要的事情，一个是第4次拉特朗公会议确定着这个 theocracy 这么一个对欧洲的大一统。实际上呢，我们看到的不完全是教会支配国家，而是教会对整个欧洲文明起着一个保姆的作用，一个 tutelage 是这么一个作用。所以在这个背景里面出现了影响现代文明最重要的一个事件，也就同时是在1215年英国通过的这个 Magna Carta 这个宪章。可以讲在人类成文史上 Magna Carta 是标志着什么？在基督教的原则下对世俗一切权利进行限制，就是来自世俗政权的一切权利进行限制。限制在什么层面呢？限制在法律层面，这个我就不多讲了，在座很多专家。第4个对我们今天中国基督教研究的一个里程碑，就是1555年奥格斯堡和平协定。那么在这个奥格斯堡和平协定确定的一个重要原则是教随国定，但是呢带来了一个灾难性的做法，就是除了安格里干、Catholic、Lutheran Church 之外，其他都是非法的。所以在那个背景中的 Free Church、Independent Church 就开始出现了。最有名的是这个阿拉巴迪斯特、这个 Mohavia、Brethren、Mennonite， 这些都受到了迫害。而这个比较重要的就是 Gallicanism 到了这个英格兰的，变成了这个 Puritan 又称这个 Mayflower 到达美国，到达北美。所以说我想在这个地方就打个顿。到目前为止 Magisterial Church 在欧洲一直是政府保护的，跟政府是在法律基础上合作的关系。到了美国也就开始了 Free Church 跟这个 Religious Tolerance 这个时代的开始。那么到了美国呢，这个 Free Church 有几个里程碑，一个里程碑就是这个加尔文的《基督教要义》在日内瓦出版，1536年。所有的 Free Church 的思想实际上都能够找到加尔文在日内瓦的改教，然后加尔文的学生们就影响了整个欧洲，当时是非法的，所以说他们到了美国以后签的第一个非常重要的协定，改变了欧洲的这个 mainstream church、magisterial church 到了美国的局面，就是1620年的5月8号公约。在座的都是专家，我就不多讲了。这个可以讲是我们中国无论是政府还是学者理解美国的外交政策，那是第一个法律文本。以后就是美国独立宣言、美国宪法，特别是宪法第1修正案，包括联合国宪章等等人权这个宣言啊，都是跟这个5月8号公约这个法律精神连在一起的。而5月8号公约又是来自在欧洲受到迫害的加尔文主义。所以说这2条线索构成了19世纪基督教进入中国的大背景。所以欧洲的国家教会今天还保持着跟中国教会的关系，就是完全符合国家的外交政策来跟我们中国教会往来。而美国呢，却不管你政府是什么政策，我们有自己的传统，我们有自己的宣教理念，这就是19世纪跟中国的关系。好，总而言之，我就是讲到2.3这个 brief conclusion 啊，就2000多年来，我们作为基督教的神学传统，怎么理解教会跟国家的关系？用马丁路德的这个范式，就是 law and gospel。如果我们把 law and gospel 这个理清楚了，我们就知道作为一个基督徒，作为一个牧师，我们怎么看待宗教自由，怎么看待对宗教自由影响最大的、对现代文明影响最大的加尔文传统中的良心自由。所有的良心自由的解释都不外乎信仰自由、这个信仰的实践自由、言论自由跟这个维护自己信仰的基本权利。所以说，律法与福音的关系，作为基督教来说呢，是我们解开中国目前 这个宗教问题的一个很好的办法，是马丁路德提出来的。那么我们来看中国，邓小平的改革开放以及我们中美关系这20年的这个良性发展，都是我们理解这个中国宗教政策在美国得到各种不同的解读的一个基本的背景，我都不讲了。那么现在我来介绍的是，我总结一下子，我们必须要承认，我们存在5种观察和界定中国基督教的途径。第一种呢，就是体制教会与非体制教会，也就是 magisterial 或者是 government approved church。第二个就是 free independent church。所以我们第一个解读是体制教会与非体制教会，第二种解读是乡村教会和城市教会。很不一样，在中国，农村教会跟城市教会完全不一样。第三种是历史教会和本土教会。第四种是宣教型的教会，宣教型的教会里面又分为海外华人的和非华人的。海外华人的就是包括我们在座洛杉矶啊这些华人，非华人的是韩国的啊、新加坡的，还有这个其他来的啊，在中国大陆也有很多宣教事工。那么第5种呢是意识形态型的教会。我认为这意识形态教会呢分成2种，一种是非共产主义型的，就是逢共必反的，跟共产主义的意识形态这个绝对发生冲突的；还有一种是呢，既不跟共产主义的意识形态发生冲突，但是呢，以一种极端民族主义的表现方式，体现出这个好像这个民族性，我都把称之为意识形态型的，就是或者是反共产主义型的，或者是极端民族主义型的，都是属于意识形态教会。那么这5种的界定呢，有大量的社会学的依据，我也做了很多的探访，但是我可能不是用社会学家的那个科学的手段，我是根据我的学生在全国各地跟他们的访谈，我就发现我们至少有这5种办法来界定中国大陆的基督教。那么现在呢，我就想作为一个牧师，对于我所在的这个两会，就是 TSPM、CCC， 我所在这个两会，我有很多这个批评性的看法。我们知道基督教的效法耶稣基督的3大职分，第一大职分就是 prophet， 这个 prophet 也具体表现在什么呢？要敢讲真话，要带一种批评的声音，才表现基督徒的谦卑，要敢于批评我们自己。所以从这个先知角度来看，我担心的是什么呢？就是我们所在的 magisterial church 在中国大陆现在越来越衙门化，越来越行政部门化，越来越看个别的宗教干部的脸色，而没有牧养教会、牧养信徒，也不是这个唯靠圣经，往往就产生了衙门化的倾向。所以我就跟这个朱新平教授、王小潮教授几个教授这2天相处的时候，我也感觉到，就是中国基督教需要来自学术界的科学的、客观的监督和批评，因为我们自己不能批评自己，就是很麻烦了。那么第二个呢，我要思考的是，就是中国的这个国情，中国的国情决定着我们是人治大于法治这么一个模式。就像昨天今天上午这个李林教授他所分析的，我们历史上是没有社会在我们的文化传统中，尽管我们这个乡绅阶层一直存在，那是另外一回事，跟西方的公民社会还不一样。但是现在我们的现代化的这个过程中，面临着一个怎么样把人治大于法治的模式解决，这就提醒我们，爱国宗教团体所有层面的负责人素质和他的这个德行，必须要跟政府主管部门的个别领导人的爱好分开来，要在法律基础上忠于自己的职分，体现着公民责任，而不是说按照宗教管理人员的个别人的爱好来决定自己的行为模式，否则的话就越来越脱离信徒。好，因为时间紧，我就简单的讲一讲。现在呢，大量的非体制教会在中国存在，对我们体制教会的挑战是什么？我就跟包括守望教会的很多神学家交往，和家庭教会的神学家交往，我发现一个担忧。我最大的担忧，我在我们金陵神学院也好，在中国官方不是官方三自教会交往的也好，我提出一个警告，就是如果我们的 magisterial church 不把圣经的教训，不把历史教会的传统传承下来，反而这些非体制教会在大量的做神学研究，在忠于信仰， 慢慢在中国基督教的历史上，我们的合法性就没有了。因为我们的合法性不是奠定于宗教局对我们的认可，而是奠基于广大信徒、广大基督徒对我们的认可。假如没有信徒的话，我们所在的教会就是空了，就变成了一个架子，对吧？所以这是一个非常大的问题。那么怎么样理解中国政府的担忧？这也是我们作为 Magisterial Church 应该回答的。就是我们作为一个大教会，我们怎么样理解中国政府的担忧？就是我的第4部分。我认为中国现在至少有5种担忧，中国政府有5种担忧，5种类型的担忧。第一种类型是列宁主义的模式，就是革命的无神论，列宁主义的模式，而用暴力革命来管理社会，这种担忧是列宁主义式的担忧。第二种是民族主义的担忧，就是来自对鸦片战争的集体回忆，民族的集体回忆。就总认为西方人在中国的所做的所有的都带有阴谋，这是一种民族主义的担忧。第3种担忧是儒家传统的担忧，因为儒家是我们中国的文化基因，我们就害怕接触，特别是基督教中的加尔文主义，强调良心自由、人人平等，强调公民的权利是天赋的，这些跟儒家传统后来在汉武帝以后发展起来的这个道统都有冲突。因为儒家强调这个 hierarchy， 你是这个层面的，你是人；你是不是这个层面的，你什么保障都没有。中国社会现在最大的问题就是这个。那么第4种担忧是地域政治学，我们怕日本、韩国跟这个台湾和周围这些问题破坏中国的这个和平发展，所以这都是中国政府的可以理解的担忧。第5种担忧是文化冲突式的担忧，我每一个展开太花时间，我就不展开了啊。那么第5种，我想呢，我们怎么样能够说服中国政府、中国知识界跟中国的宗教界，在面对着天主教的问题、这个家庭教会的问题等等，我们应该呢明确几个方面的这个办法。第一个，从政治层面，我们要相信孙中山先生的预言，中华民族的现代化3个阶段肯定是不可逆转的，就是这个军政、训政、宪政。这3个阶段对中华民族是有好处的，并不是要搞乱中国。所以我说，这是第一个政治的层面，我们从神学方面要加以解释。第2个，从真理的层面，我们也要确认，就是基督教对中华民族的确是造福中华民族，里面包含的真理是 universal， 是普遍的。
1 minute。
1 minute， 好。那么最后呢，我想从自治的角度，从教会举2个例子。一个，能不能把天主教作为一个自治的一个模式加以研究，相信天主教的教义能够承担起它的公民责任，能够在中国有好处，而不能采取行政的手法来对天主教加以过多的介入。第2个就是关于基督教的家庭教会，你比如这个地方教会我原来对这个李图森不是很熟悉。我最近因为这个研究这个地方教会的自治，我发现它已经形成了一个自治的教义系统，跟天主教一样。我们作为大教会应该尊重宗派传统，所以中国现在强调所谓的后宗派，我从神学上没有解释，我倒觉得现在是前宗派时期。宗派不是坏事，所以我赞成朱新平教授的一个名言：教外有教，教内有派。这个派我觉得不是贬义词，而是一个客观的判断。好，这就是我的发言，谢谢大家。
We have Dr. Wu.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, it's my part. The last one, I hope still okay for you. I try to keep very short. I have 2 things before I begin my presentation. I have to say, apologize for the paper you got right now is a very early draft of my paper. Okay, but I have on file with ARC with my final version. If you are interested in looking at, please contact them. And the second one is I tried to do my presentation in English, but maybe sometimes I will use my Chinese to reinforce, okay, to express my idea clearly. Okay, now okay, before I begin my presentation, one more thing I would like to say. This morning there's one dialogue between the U.S. and China. Okay, there's something about the benchmark. Okay, what is the freedom religion? Okay, I have to say first, according to my understanding, the freedom of religion encompasses four aspects or immigrants. Okay, the first is freedom of religious belief, and the second, freedom of religious behavior activities. Okay, and the third one is freedom of organization, which cover the religion management autonomy. Okay, the fourth is a principle of separation of church and state. Okay, so I will begin my presentation under this understanding of freedom of religion. Okay, there are 6 parts in my presentation. The first part is grounds of religious groups in Taiwan. I use some statistics data. The second one, I will go through the 100-year religious legislation efforts in Taiwan. The third one is some judicial and legislative efforts. The third one is we will take closely on the work. Okay, we're doing about religious legislation. Okay, that's a draft. Okay, we call the Religious Group Act draft. Okay, RGAD, and I will give some critical perspective about the RGAD, and I will give my conclusion. Okay, there's someone say Taiwan is there's a religious miracle in Taiwan. Okay, and this island is a religious island. Okay, to say that if we look at the statistic data, you can see within this 20 years, okay, the religious group here is according to the government statistics data. So it's a registered religious group. Okay, increase faster. Okay, for this 20 years, it increased about 40%. Okay, in this recent 10 years, it increased about 25%. Okay. Here is another the trend. You can see the temple category in Taiwan. The government statistic data, they categorize the the religious group into 27. Okay, 27 categories. You can see the major religious group as a temple, the biggest one, increased very fast. However, the Christianity, which consists of Catholics and Christian, is increased slowly. It's a temple, the largest one. Okay, maybe there will be a surprise to the people from China. Okay, the biggest one is a Taoism. It's not a. The second one is Buddhism, and the third one is the Yiguan Taoism. Okay, that's the situation in Taiwan according to the government statistic. the church, okay, category consists of Christian and Catholic. Okay, like Christian is much bigger than the Catholic. Okay, you can see that. And this one's the registration data, which means the religious groups register with the government. Okay, you can see it's only very small amount religious groups has filed a registration with the government. Okay, so that's one of the background. We want to enact a law to regulate or to register the religious group. Here is this one is a temple category. Okay, very few registered with the government. This one's the church category. Okay, and this one's the main religious group in Taiwan. That's their proportion. Okay, the biggest one is the Taoism, the second, the Buddhism, then the Christian, then the Catholic. Now I can begin the religious regulatory history about Taiwan. Okay, well, in 1913, very early that year, that's the second year we've established the Republic of China. The Yuan is under the Yuan Sikai as government. They enact the first modern religious law. Okay, it's called IOTM, 私院管理暂行条例. It's very ironic. Okay, that one is Yuan tried to mobilize the property of the temple to gain some military to fulfill some military purpose. So he enacted this religious regulation. That's the first one. The second one is a TRO, Temple Regulatory Ordinance, in 1915. Nothing special, but it's very obviously stress on the supervisor and regulator status of government. And the third one is a revised one. It just expand some provisions of the previous one. You can see there's a time difference. Okay, here. After the Kuomintang, the Nationalist Party, gained the power to control the whole China, they enact the TMO. Okay, this one is a very unique one because in this one, the Nationalist Party, the Kuomintang, they try to use their party ideology into the religious legislation. Okay, for example, there's one provision says any temple or religious group, their library, they have to post the regulation, which should incorporate into the Kuomintang's discipline or principle. Okay, in that. Okay, and any religious group contradict or violate the party principle should be punished. Okay. About the same year, okay, because the former one is too strict. Okay, so it's gained a very many protests from the religious group. So at the end of that year, there's another one. Okay, we call TSO, Temple Supervision Ordinance, And this one is now the current one and the only valid one in Taiwan. Very old. It's outdated.
2 minutes.
Oh. Okay. And I have to jump. Okay. There are many judicial, after that, many judicial and legislative work made in Taiwan. For example, this one, okay? A TSO, as I say that, they have been declared unconstitutional, okay? Before that, that's a very, it's an impossible thing in Taiwan, okay? But in 2004, the Judicial Yuan declared is unconstitutional in 2 provisions. And this opened the door for the government to enact a new law. Okay, here we can see the newest one, okay? Not the newest one, the ones, okay? From 1961, we can see the Taiwan 省寺庙管理法案, okay? DTR still keep the old ideology. And the second one in 1979 changed a little bit, increased the church, but still keep the supervisor and regulator concept. But the third one is changed. It uses protection, okay? The last one is the newest draft. They combined the old, change concept into this new law. This law has, this draft has been passed by the Congress, the Interior Committee in 2009. Here is the table of contents, okay? We define 3 religious groups. One is a monastery, temple, and church. The second one is religious association. The third one, religious foundation. I will say that according to the Article 1, there's nothing new, okay? Basically, it's no meaning. There's a very there's Article 21, there's paragraph 1, okay? They invent, there's one provision, okay, according to the religious group, how to transfer or acquire the public land, not for public use, okay? That's an invention, because many religious groups in Taiwan, they occupy the public land. They try to use this religious law to gain the title of that public land. So many interest groups, of course, the religious group, they try to use the opportunity, this new law, to get their benefit. There's one article about the name, okay? The name is, for us, it's for common people, it's just for distinguish. But for a religious group, it's very important. It's a badge of orthodox and a spatial commitment. But in this law, there's some regulation which will give some the new religious group and other minority group very bad situation to register their name with the government. And there's a sect category issue, okay? And in this provision, that religious sects was classified as separate in accordance with statistic classification. Okay, so that's a new religious group cannot get or cannot. There will be a discriminate according to this new law. There's some articles. They adopt merits registration requirements rather than enabling. I would say that's very bad because the government hands they can use the opportunity to intervene. Okay, there's some articles as, from my point of view is contradict or harm the internal autonomy of the religious group. And there's the last one is bureaucratization and hierarchy implication. In our law, the formal one, okay, we have many drafts, okay. In the early one, it says the national religious group should, okay, it's a mandatory requirement. They should, they get the power to supervise or guide your inferior organization. Okay, that's ideas came from the Catholic and some hierarchy bureaucratic system of church in Taiwan. They try to use this new law to gain the power to control their inferior church. Okay, so they want this. But now, after some consideration, this word the wording has been switched from the should to may. My conclusion is RGAD is neither plausible in theory nor sound in practice. And the important draft should be examined thoroughly before it can be put into effective law. And this can best be done by following the principle of freedom of religion. And that's according to my standing is religious belief, religious behavior, religious organization autonomy, and separation of church and state. Okay, thank you very much.
I want to thank you for all our four presenters, and I really want to apologize to Dr. Wu for the time, because what he has to present is really worth taking some time, but just, we just don't have the time. And I hope you can take his paper and read through it. It's really very, very interesting, and he has spent a lot of time writing those things. Okay. Now we still have probably 5 minutes or so. We're open for questions, and you can direct your questions to any one of them or to all of them. Okay, but please tell us who you are before you give your questions. Okay, so who has the first questions? Raise your hands, please. Okay, we have one, two.
Larry Dax, International Research and Exchanges Board. I guess my question would be to Michael. What kinds of persons are becoming Christians in China? By that I don't mean what groups of minority groups, but does it reflect a cross section of the economics of the society, rural, urban? What in general, if there are trends of people who are becoming Christians, how would you describe them?
Thank you. You mean the ethnic Chinese, among the ethnic Chinese in Singapore?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was directing that towards Nanjing in mainland China. I apologize. It's not because all Chinese look alike. It's because my eyes are bad. Sorry about that.
那么在中国有2类人容易变成基督徒，第一类就是非常善良的，没受过什么教育的，非常敬虔的，被基督教信仰的神秘性给吸引了，神秘的地方给吸引了。第二类呢是精英 ，national elites 是第二类，因为在基督教里面有很多那个关于这个 truth 的解释，像这些抽象的这个 non-personal truth 吸引了中国的精英。所以我喜欢天主教一个神学家叫卡伊纳纳，他说匿名基督徒，这2类现在在中国非常多。
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Milton.
Gordon Melton,
Milton.
Baylor University. When did this concerns Taiwan? When did the ROC begin to exercise authority in Taiwan? I assume that Japan was running the island up until World War II, and you've got them here in 1912 passing regulations. What part of my history have I missed?
Okay. We have Chinese from both of Taiwan Straits. It's a sensitive one, your question. Okay. The Republic of China was established in 1912. That's the first year. Okay. And that's in 1949 we moved from China, mainland China, to Taiwan. So, but the history didn't end. Okay, so I covered 1 century. Actually, we just celebrate our 100th birthday, 100-year birthday this week. Okay, sorry.
Okay, but just to be clear, the regulations you discussed from 1912 to 49 were not in effect in Taiwan. They were in effect in China and then carried to Taiwan?
Interesting. The most current, okay, the only valid one, still the one met in China. The period we control, we govern in mainland China. It's in 1929. Okay.
Anyone else? One? Oh. Okay.
John Barwick with Global China Center. I had a question for Professor Tai from Hong Kong. You were talking about how in Hong Kong the system regarding religion is not, at least in the short term, applicable in China. Is there any kind of dialogue going on between religious leaders in Hong Kong and their counterparts in mainland China, discussing the differences and kind of learning from one another? How is there any chance of seeing that kind of thing happen?
Well, I think that, again, we have to distinguish the institutional church and the non-institutional churches, or mainly I'm talking about the Protestant and the Catholic. Surely that the institutional level, that's connection, but surely the Catholic Church has its own issues about the institutional connection. But the kind of issue they discuss may not be kind of talking about the law and religion model, that kind of things, more on the spiritual thing if they have a connection, I see. The same for the non-institutional level. I think I can talk more about the Protestant churches, that again, that the main emphasis will be, this morning we have talked about the private dimension or the public dimension. I think the Hong Kong churches also kind of very much influenced by the missionaries from the United States, and so it's more on the evangelical tradition. And the evangelical tradition emphasize more on the private dimension than on the public dimension. And even if it's on the public dimension, will be on the charitable or charities kind of work, but not so much on the social movement kind of or kind of social justice, that kind of acts. So that's I think if there's in the dialogue will be more on the private dimension and not that much on the public dimension. But my point is that actually, well, in the long run, or maybe in the short run, actually, should be that the dialogue should also get into the public dimension. But maybe the Chinese church has no such interest because, again, they will emphasize more on the private dimension than the public dimension.
Okay, we have time for one more question, but please direct it to Dr. Poon.
Thank you. I'm Lauren Homer. I'm an international lawyer, and I did have a question for Dr. Poon. I know you said you didn't want to talk about China, but in the course of today, we've heard a lot about the idea that if it is in the best interest of mainland China to encourage religious organizations to exist, it would be in the interest of stabilizing and harmonizing society. So how structurally is that done in Singapore, and do you see any applications for that in mainland China?
Thank you. I just share with you my personal experience rather than making sweeping statements. I think Professor Zhuo Xinping and many of the colleagues from China are more able to respond to that. From what I understand, and I stand to be corrected here, I don't think China sees Singapore as a country, as a nation. Singapore is so small. It's just, for the Indonesians, it's a small red dot. China sees Singapore as a model. We engage as a model for a city, rather than as a country. So it is out of proportion, especially in the in economic development, in building up of super cities, with the multicultural and aspects of Singapore. That I think that's what attracts some of the the interest of the social sciences and policymakers in China. So there's a lot of exchanges there, and I think Singapore has the advantage of being a Mandarin, mainly a Mandarin-speaking, Chinese-speaking huge community with a lot of historic and cultural link with Chinese counterparts. So there's a lot of conversations, mutual visits going on, and consultations, and there's not much. So in what we can say is much more on partnerships in sharing of resources and in that kind of exchanges. That is, I think there are a lot of discussions about that. For example, know that Shanghai the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences, they have some interest in Singapore because they also think through urban policies and religious policies sometimes, and they engage some of my colleagues and in Singapore about that. So yes, I see Singapore as a friend, as a companion along the way, but as Singapore we cannot do everything. We are just too small to be significant for China. At the same time, I think we, being that distance and not political charges in handling the special administrative region, that kind of relationship, we are also an independent nation right there in Asia. So we don't have all the rhetorics about East-West and China against the West or West against China, that kind of thing. So in a way, Singapore is out of that kind of conflict, and we're able to engage China in a different way. So does it help?
Well, because of time, we need to stop here. But I would ask you to please help me to give these four panelists a big hand.